Good morning, church. I want you to know how much I missed you last week. I know you were richly blessed by the ministry of Brother Kerry Borkert. What a joy he is to serve with and how faithful he is to the Word. I'll just throw in one more plug for you. It's not one more plug. I'm going to do this over and over again. Wednesday nights are so much fun. And so if you enjoyed last Sunday, then you will want to consider coming out on Wednesday nights and joining us for the Bible study. If you did not enjoy last Sunday, Wednesday nights are even better. So come out anyways. And faithful are the wounds of a friend, brother. Remember, God's Word says that. And so I love you, dude. I really do. Hey, listen, be taking your Bibles and turning with me, with us, to the book of Nehemiah chapter 2. Kim and I did enjoy our time away last week as we were with Kristen and her graduation there in Scotland. Thank you so much for allowing us that opportunity. I want you to know that even while I'm away, I'm working. I spent all day at the British Museum one day just heaping up sermon illustrations for you. I cannot wait. It was so much fun. And one of the things that I was able to get my eyes on was a little cylinder that had etched into it the decree that was issued by Cyrus, allowing the people, actually commanding the people to leave the area of Babylon and go back to their homelands. And that particular decree was the one that sent Israel from Babylon back to the Promised Land after their exile in Babylon. And that's important because what that does is that tells us that God fulfills His promises. See, the people of Israel did not wind up in Babylon by accident. God had foretold, like, this is going to happen. You all need to be ready for it. In fact, He hinted at it at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, which was written around 1440 BC. And then whenever God fulfilled that promise, He said He's going to send the people of Israel into exile because of their idolatry. He did so with another promise. First, through the prophet Isaiah. Then later, through the prophet Jeremiah, Ezekiel told us about it, Daniel told us about it, that God fulfills His promises, that He will not forget the people of Israel in exile. It was a huge promise, because what that meant to them is even though they were going through a period of judgment, the judgment would not last. That even God's judgment for them was a form of grace. This is a tremendous promise for you and I. Because we need to know that even when we go through hard times, like those that we've been talking about, as long as there is breath, there is opportunity for redemption. I believe that. If you are here this morning or watching online and you're wondering, like, what's my place? And does God really love me? And does God really want me? And is God really willing to hear me? The answer is, if you're here, yes, He is. He wants this for you. Because He wants you and I to live a life that is rich and connected with Him. It's the whole reason that God did what He did with the redemption story. I love that song that Sterling was just singing. Holy, holy, holy. I love it because it comes directly from the Bible. I hope you like it too, because apparently when we get to heaven, like, we're going to be singing that song a lot. Every time that the Bible opens up the gates of heaven and allows us to peer into it, we see them singing the song. It happened in Isaiah. It happens again in the book of Revelation, where there are these beings unimaginable who are crying out, holy, holy, holy. And you have to understand that what's happening there is it's the Hebrew way of saying this is the most holy, the greatest holy. See, they didn't have superlative words like you and I have, good, better, best, fast, faster, fastest. If they wanted something to be emphasized, if they wanted you to know how much better it was than the thing that came before it, than anything else, then they would simply repeat the word again and again. And so if something was good, it was good, good. And if something was bright, it was bright, bright. And if something was heavy, it was heavy, heavy. And if something was holy, it was holy, holy. And if it was the holiest of all, if it was the greatest, holiest thing ever seen by humanity, it was holy, holy, holy. Totally separated. Now, this is important for you and I and for the text that we're about to read because it tells us something about how we were built. You and I were built to give God glory. It's the whole reason God put us here in this space. It's the reason God gave us, inside of us, this incredible void in our heart that will never be satisfied until our life is bent to honor Him. And so when we open up the story of Nehemiah, and specifically the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, we find people who are leaving Persia and Babylon and being directed back to the promised land by the foreknowledge and glory, for the glory of God. And as they arrive there, they are arriving there to give God glory. They want to give their very best to God. Now, I know as a church, this is where our heart is. If it's not your heart, I hope you get there real quick. That everything that we do here, whether you are tending the lawn outside, scraping the snow off the sidewalk, as we will be doing here before too long, apparently, given the temperature that's out there right now. If we're cleaning up inside here, if we're teaching, if we're singing, if we're preaching, we are doing all things as to the Lord. We are giving Him our greatest effort. Now, this is what Nehemiah is trying to do here in chapter 2. As we open up this story, what we see is we're actually being dropped into the middle of a larger story. Ezra and Nehemiah, the books that we have in our Bible today, were actually part of one single scroll in the Old Testament. I will commend to you a video by Tim Mackey. You can find it on Right Now Media, and if you don't have a subscription, see us. We will get you one. And Tim Mackey does a great job of pointing out how that these two books that we today see as separate, Ezra and Nehemiah, were actually part of one thing. Originally, Ezra is written in the third person, so someone else is writing it. Nehemiah is written in the first person, so he's talking about himself and he's saying all these things that he has done. And so what everyone believes has happened here is that Ezra writes his story, but he's describing the work of Zerubbabel, a man named Zerubbabel, and Ezra in the book of Ezra that comes before the book of Nehemiah. Now here's the main thing that you want to catch out of all of that. There is a pattern that happens in these books. The story, there's actually 3, 2 in Ezra, 1 in Nehemiah. The story opens by giving us a decree that's offered by a king. It's followed up by the effort of the people, by the work of the people as they serve God faithfully. And then there's some critical problem. There's some struggle that the people face. And they try to overcome it. But as they overcome it, something terrible happens. They overcome the problem. They address the problem in the absolute worst way possible. It happens with Zerubbabel at the beginning of the book of Ezra. It happens with the story of Ezra as the people are coming back into the land. It happens in the book of Nehemiah. We don't have time to go into all of that. I would suggest read through those 2 books and you will begin to see what's happening here in this story. What's going on here? Why is this happening? Well, when we read a book like this, we have to recognize that the characters of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, or in other books of the Bible, like if we're reading about Moses or Abraham or David, those stories are not about those men. They are not the heroes of the story. Ezra is not the hero of his story. Zerubbabel is not the hero of his story. You and I are not the heroes of our story. And Nehemiah is not the hero of his story. I know some of you think I'm rambling at this point. Maybe I am a little, but there's a reason for the rambling. The reason this is important is because usually when we open up the book of Nehemiah, like if you've been in church any length of time at all, and you hear someone preaching or teaching through the book of Nehemiah, what you hear from them is all of these wonderful leadership lessons. Like Nehemiah is the book you go to if you're talking about leadership, because it looks like he is doing so much well as a leader. And he is. I mean, you can see some of it here in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 17. He's arranged this incredible opportunity with King Artaxerxes to go back and to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And walls were very important in that day. Like if you didn't have walls, you were subject to being attacked by animals or being attacked by marauders. And so you needed fences, you needed walls. And so he arranges opportunity. He goes back to Jerusalem. He presents his letters and shows everyone that he has the authority to be there. And then he sets out to do the work. And as part of his effort, he's encouraging the people to get involved with the work. Nobody, please hear me, nobody is able to sit idle when the work is so important. Every hand must be put to the plow. They were at war. You and I, if the Bible is to be true, is to be believed, we are at war. And so every single one of us have to be putting forth effort and working. So Nehemiah is encouraging the people. Look what he does in verse number 17. He says, therefore I said to them, he's speaking to the people of Jerusalem about building the walls. He said, therefore I said, you see the trouble that we are in. There's a problem that needs to be addressed. And if we don't do something about this issue, then we are all going to be in trouble. There's an enemy out there. How many of you know, and I don't mean to get too hyper-spiritual, but how many of you know that as Christians, there's a whole nother realm out there where there's a war that's happening. There's a spiritual warfare. It's the reason Paul tells us that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. That without Christ, you and I are in trouble. There's an enemy out there who, in the same way that he devoured Job's life, in the same way that he sought to take Peter's life and to sift him like wheat, if the Father in heaven lifted his hand just a little, and there was a little crack to get in, the enemy would roll in like fire and attack us. So it's there. And he says, you know how we're in this trouble, how Jerusalem lies in ruins, its gates are burned. Come, there's something that has to be done about this, he says. Come, let us build the walls of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer a derision or shame. He says, I told them of all that the hand of my God had been upon me for good, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, well, let us rise up and build. Why? Because Nehemiah comes in and he's pointing them to the work that God had already done. Can you believe what God has done for us, he says. God has allowed this pagan king to send us back. He's commanded this pagan king to send us back. And when he sent me back with letters. He sent me back with people to help. He sent me back with resources. He sent me back with finances. Look how good God has been to us. And he goes back. He looks back at the goodness of God in his past to point the people to trusting God in the future. Hey, we can do the same thing, can't we? How many of you know that God has been richly good to you? And not just in this incredible bubble of safety and security and prosperity that we live in, that may or may not be a blessing. But in the power of Jesus Christ, you and I have peace and confidence that cannot be achieved otherwise. And because of what he has done in the past, because he has given his own son for us, because he, in his triune being, has sacrificed his life and existence for us, because he's allowed our sinfulness to brush up against his righteousness, we know if he's willing to do that, what would he not be willing to do for us? So this is how we know we can trust God. So they see this. They recognize, Nehemiah points them to the fact that God has been so good to them. And so out of that response, they say, yeah, let's be faithful. Let's try. So they strengthen their hands for the good work. But there's always opposition. And Nehemiah points it out here in his story, verse number 19. A man named Sanballat, who was probably the governor of the area of Samaria. Most of you are aware that there was a huge conflict between the Jews who lived in Jerusalem and the Samaritans, who were a mix of races who lived just to the north of Jerusalem. in an area called Samaria. So this individual, Sanballat, the Horonite, and one of his friends named Tobiah, the Ammonite, servant of Gershon, and the Arabite, heard of it, and they jeered at us and despised us. Now look at what his response is. How does he respond? How does Nehemiah respond to this outward pressure? He turns to them and probably sends a letter and says, what is it? Or they said to him, what is this thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And of course he's not. Now look at how they respond. Verse number 20, here it is. And I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper. Now, that is the linchpin, the foundation stone of what it means to be a faithful worker for God. Because whenever we come to the service of God, we know He is worthy of our best efforts. He deserves it. And so, because of that, we try. We put forth the effort. Now, I don't have to prove to you that there's a problem with effort today. That one of the biggest challenges faced in the job market, faced in our society today, is that people don't try. As my children were growing up, from a very early age, one of the things that I said to them that I'm sure they have forgotten because they didn't write any of this stuff down, is I said to them, just show up. If you will just show up, you will be in the top 10 percentile, because the biggest problem with our species, not just our generation, but the biggest problem with our species is that we quit way too soon and we stop trying. Now, Nehemiah is encouraging the people here to try, to put forth the effort, to be faithful. But the problem is, especially in our society here in the West, is because we try and we put forth the effort, we sometimes think it's all about us and our efforts. It's all about what we can do and what we can produce. And I'm here to tell you that's a lot of pressure. Because there's so much about the work that you and I are doing. Whether it's trying to keep a healthy marriage, raise stable, Christ-following children, maintain a job, keep finances afloat. There's so much about all of the goals that you and I have as individuals that we don't have any control over. And it's the same thing as a church, right? I mean, we could put forth our best effort, and we definitely should. And we can decide, okay, here's what we're going to lay out the plan, and here's how it's going to happen, and here's what's going on. But there's so much happening out there in the world that we cannot control, and the sovereignty of God maps all of this out. This is why you and I are told that we aren't called, right, in Scripture over and over again, we aren't called to be effective. What are we called to be? Yeah, that's it, right? Just be faithful. I've referenced a number of times from this pulpit the story of the talents in the book of Matthew, where Jesus is telling us what the kingdom of heaven is like. And he says, it's kind of like a guy who goes away. And when he goes away, he leaves some currency, some of his resources, his assets, with 3 of his servants. And he says, do business till I come back. And you know the story. Whenever Jesus comes back, one of the guys has taken the master's resources and he's doubled it. And another one likewise has taken his master's resources and he's doubled it. Do you recall what Jesus said to both of those servants who served? He said, well done, my good and faithful servant. He doesn't point to the effects. He doesn't say, well done, my good and prosperous servant. Well done, my good and faithful, effective servant. He says, well done, my good and faithful servant. I'm telling you, as a pastor, many years ago, I wrestled with my apparent ineffectiveness in ministry. I couldn't figure out why am I not leading a mega church by now? I mean, I'm good looking. We all know it's not true now, but right. I mean, what's the problem here? Why am I not being effective? And then God opened up this this passage to me, and he showed me the point is not to be effective. The point is to be faithful. This is why you and I are called to attach ourselves to the vine. We abide in him. Our effort is not to produce fruit with all of our grit and our grunting, trying to produce something from us. Our objective as Christians is just to be attached to the vine. And if we're attached to the vine, then we know out of that fruit will come. We don't always see it in this side of eternity. It doesn't always look how we want it to look. But we know if we put forth the effort, if we are faithful, God himself is even more faithful. So trying is just part of it, isn't it? Yeah, we put forth our best effort. But over trying, something else is required. See, if you and I just try, if it's just about our effort, then ultimately our trying will lead to trouble. Our faithfulness will lead to frustration. Something else has to be done. In addition to trying, we must trust. We try, and then after trying and giving our very best, our tries are followed by trust. This is exactly what Nehemiah is saying here in verse number 20. Now I want you to watch this. Nehemiah says the God of heaven, he is the one. He will make us prosper. It's not about us and our trials. It's not about us and our swords as they're about to pick up. It's not about any of that. He is going to be the one who makes us prosper. He and we are his servants. As his servants will arise and build, but you will have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. This is all about him and his glory. We will try, and then we will trust. We will be faithful, and then we will have faith. We will lift with all of our mights, but then we're going to lean on him. This is the secret, the recipe to not losing your mind in all of the stuff that we know is important. You put forth your best effort in marriage, but you know, like there's a lot of circumstances out there that can make the thing more complicated and difficult. What do? You trust. You try your best raising your children, doing everything you can. Even though you're imperfect, you put forth your best effort, but you know there are so many variables out there that you cannot control, and kids eventually make up their own mind, don't they? What do? You trust. You put forth your best effort in your career, and you try to be as faithful as possible in stewarding your finances, but you don't know what's coming around the bend. What do? You trust. And when you don't trust, that's where things get maddening, where things get frustrating, where you lay awake at sleepless nights trying to figure out how to solve a puzzle when all the pieces aren't there. What do? You trust. And when you don't trust, the absence of trust leads to trouble. The absence of faith leads to frustration. We can see it in the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is not the hero of the story. Let me just, by show of hands, I'm just curious. How many of you have read the end of the book of Nehemiah? A couple of you? So yeah, you know what happens, don't you? Brother goes crazy. Let me just read for you one passage from Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 14. I'll tell you what's going on here. We're almost done. Here it is. So at the end of the book of Nehemiah is looking around the city. He's gone for a little while. He's gone back to Persia. He comes back, and when he comes back, he finds out that a man named Tobiah has been moved into the temple. And the storage facility where the things of God had been stored have all been moved out, and this apartment has been created for this guy. And then he looks and he sees that the Levites aren't serving in the temple. They're all out in their fields and on their farms working. And he's frustrated. He's so frustrated because these things are happening, and he takes one step back and he leaves, and the whole thing falls apart. And then he goes out and he looks around the town and he hears some people talking, and he's like, wait a second, That's not Hebrew. That's something else. And so he goes and he talks to these young people, and he finds out that the children of Israel are marrying the idolatrous pagan people of the land, which is, if you know anything about the history of Israel, that's how they wound up in this situation to begin with, is the people were not following God, they were following the gods of the people they were dating, which was a problem. And so Nehemiah gets frustrated, he screams at them, he challenges them to do better, to do right. And then the Sabbath comes around, and he looks, and he's looking over the wall, and he sees outside this beautiful wall that he has built, that people have all sorts of market booths set up, and they're selling on the Sabbath. Now, they won't do it inside the city because that's a no-no, but they're outside the city, and everyone's leaving the city, and they're going out to shop there on the Sabbath day. And Nehemiah says, this isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And he becomes very frustrated. In verse number 25, look at what he does. Nehemiah 13, verse 25. He says, I confronted them and cursed them. Not very pastoral, is it? Cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. I mean, that's not the kind of guy you hire as pastor, is it? I mean, he angry. He's lost it. What's happened here? What's going on here? Well, number one, the Bible is letting us know very clearly. And by the way, Nehemiah wrote this, and you can tell whenever you read what's happening here that he's writing, and he's like, I don't know that he saw a problem with it. He's just being zealous for God. But you and I are able to look at this outside the weeds, and we look at this and like, yeah, it gets frustrating, and it's scary because the people are doing things that got them in trouble to begin with. But seriously, cursing them, beating them, pulling out their hair, where is that in the law? And the answer is it's not there. So what's going on? What we see here is that Nehemiah is not the hero of the story. Earlier in the book of Ezra, when we're introduced to Zerubbabel, the hopes are high. Why are the hopes high? Because in every book of the Bible, we get this hint that the people are looking for something. What are they looking for? In Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Joshua and Judges and Ruth and Samuel, what are they looking for? They're looking for the Messiah. They're looking for the coming of the King. And when Zerubbabel finishes the temple, he lays the foundation of the temple. Well, whenever Solomon did that, the Spirit of God descended in a cloud, and the people could not minister by way of the cloud. And it was this incredible day. But when Zerubbabel finishes the temple, nothing happens. And the people weep. And then under Ezra, the people come back, and there's this holy movement, and everyone knows this is the fulfillment of the promise, and God's people are coming back. And after they come back, that means Messiah is soon coming. But then the people start intermarrying with the idolatrous residents of the land, and there's this incredible mass divorce that occurs because they're trying to figure out what to do, and Messiah is not there. And then Nehemiah comes back, and they rebuild the walls, and there's this high moment where it looks like everything's right. And then they're out one day, and they're reading the law for 7 days rather. They're there, and they're reading the law publicly, and everyone's listening, and they're taking it in, and it's a great moment, and surely this is it. Maybe Messiah will come here. And everyone's looking for this moment whenever Israel will rise to the place where it receives the promises that were offered to it, that every man would sit under his own fig tree, and there would be blessing and peace. And maybe this is the moment, but yet whenever you turn to the last page of the book of Nehemiah, you find out it's not yet. It's not yet, because Nehemiah is not the hero of the story. And his best efforts fail, which at the end of all of these stories, please hear me, we're almost done. At the end of all of these stories, we are left with hunger, looking for someone who can do what Nehemiah could not do. And we make our best effort, and we try, but it's in him that we trust. I love how Nehemiah wraps up here. Nehemiah ends with a prayer. He says, remember me, O my Lord, remember them. He actually says earlier, he prays 3 times. He says, remember me, and he says, remember them, oh God, because they have desecrated the priesthood and and the covenant of the priesthood with the Levites has been broken. Thus I cleanse. Listen to what he says. Thus I cleanse them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priest and the Levites, each of his own work, and I provided for the wood offering at the appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, O God, for good. And there the story ends. What do you think's going on here? What do you think happens after this? More frustration? More failure? Nehemiah claims this big victory where he says, I've cleaned them. I've made it work. And you know he's gripping at it because he's trying. But it doesn't work, does it? Because Nehemiah has not cleansed them. But someone has. Someone who did come in and purge the temple. Someone who did come in and announce what was right and challenge the people to try, but then also to trust. Someone who was able to cleanse. And so the whole book of Nehemiah points us to him. So what's happening here in this story? You and I, as followers of Christ, are people who are called to try and give our very best to the God who served, who gave his very best to us. That's what we do as followers of Christ. That's what we do here as a church at Christiansburg Baptist Church. We try. But we know there's a plan out there that's far greater than our plan. Here in a few minutes, Mike is going to come up and he's going to talk about the things that happened in 2024 and some things that we look forward to in 2025. And we know that we make our plans, but God, according to the author of Proverbs, we make our plans, but God measures our steps. And so the way we keep from losing our mind, the way we maintain sanity in all this is we give our very best efforts to the God who gave his very best to us. But outside of that, trying alone is not going to get it done. Trying is going to lead to us cursing and beating and pulling out our own hair. So we must trust that God has a plan for us, and his plans are the right plans. And there are things that you and I cannot control, but there is one thing that we can. We direct our efforts and our heart towards him, that he gets our very best effort. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to ask Mike to come up, and he will guide us in what we're going to do next. This is our opportunity to respond to this incredible story of Nehemiah that propels us, that encourages us to try, but then to trust. To be faithful, but then to have faith. To lift with all of our might, but then to lean. To be there, but more importantly, to believe. So let's just do this right now. Father, as we come to you, we thank you that you have given us this incredible opportunity to be a part of the work that you are doing in Christiansburg, in Shawsville, in Blacksburg, and in the surrounding communities. Lord, we are so very grateful that you fill our lives with meaning in this way. So would you propel us, encourage us, inspire us, equip us to give our very best to you. We want it to matter. And then having done that, Father, would you help us to trust? Having been faithful, now our faithfulness turns to faith. And we rely that you are going to do what's right. That if we will simply do what we're supposed to do, if we do what's right, we know that you will do always